a WikiVidi documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. Geography of Canada. The geography of Canada describes the geographic features of Canada, the world's second-largest country in total area. Situated in northern North America, Canada spans a vast, diverse territory between the North Pacific Ocean to the west and the North Atlantic Ocean to the east and the Arctic Ocean to the north, with the United States to the south and northwest. Greenland is to the northeast. Off the southern coast of Newfoundland lies Saint-Pierre and Miquelon, an overseas collectivity of France. Since 1925, Canada has claimed the portion of the Arctic between 60 degrees west and 141 degrees west longitude to the North Pole. However, this claim is contested. While the magnetic North Pole lies within the Canadian Arctic territorial claim as of 2011, recent measurements indicate it is moving towards Siberia, covering 9,984,670 square kilometers. Canada is slightly less than 3/5 as large as Russia and slightly smaller than Europe. In total area, Canada is slightly larger than both the US and China. However, Canada ranks fourth in land area. China is 9,326,410 square kilometers and the US is 9,161,923 square kilometers. The population of Canada, some 35,151,728 as of May 10, 2016, is concentrated in the south in proximity to its border with the contiguous US with a population density of 3.5 people per square kilometer. It is one of the most sparsely populated countries in the world. The northernmost settlement in Canada, and in the world, is Canadian Forces Station Alert on the northern tip of Ellesmere Island at 82 degrees 30 and 62 degrees 19 W, just 834 kilometers from the North Pole. Climate. Canada has a diverse climate. The climate varies from temperate on the west coast of British Columbia to a subarctic climate in the north. Extreme northern Canada can have snow for most of the year with a polar climate. Landlocked areas tend to have a warm summer continental climate zone with the exception of southwestern Ontario, which has a hot summer humid continental climate. Parts of western Canada have a semi-arid climate. And parts of Vancouver Island can even be classified as cool summer Mediterranean climate. Temperature extremes in Canada range from 45.0 degrees Celsius in Midale and Yellowgrass, Saskatchewan on July 5, 1937 to -63.0 degrees Celsius in Snag, Yukon on Monday, February 3, 1947. Physical geography. Canada covers 9,984,670 square kilometers and a panoply of various geoclimatic regions. There are 8 main regions. Canada also encompasses vast maritime terrain, with the world's longest coastline of 243,042 kilometers. The physical geography of Canada is widely varied. Boreal forests prevail throughout the country. Ice is prominent in northerly Arctic regions and through the Rocky Mountains. And the relatively flat Canadian prairies in the southwest facilitate productive agriculture. The Great Lakes feed the St. Lawrence River, where lowlands host much of Canada's population. Appalachian Mountains. The Appalachian Mountain Range extends from Alabama through the Gaspé Peninsula and the Atlantic provinces, creating rolling hills indented by river valleys. It also runs through parts of southern Quebec. The Appalachian Mountains are an old and eroded range of mountains, approximately 380 million years in age. Notable mountains in the Appalachians include Mount Jacques Cartier. Part of the Appalachians are home to a rich endemic flora and fauna and are considered to have been nunataks during the last glaciation era. Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Lowlands. The southern parts of Quebec and Ontario, in the section of the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Basin, is another particularly rich sedimentary plain. Prior to its colonization and heavy urban sprawl of the 20th century, this eastern Great Lakes lowland forests area was home to large mixed forests covering a mostly flat area of land between the Appalachian Mountains and the Canadian Shield. Most of this forest has been cut down through agriculture and logging operations, but the remaining forests are for the most part heavily protected. In this part of Canada, the Gulf of St. Lawrence is one of the world's largest estuary, while the relief of these lowlands is particularly flat and regular. A group of batholites known as the Montérégion Hills are spread along a mostly regular line across the area. The most notable are Montreal's Mount Royal and Montana's St. Hilaire. These hills are known for a great richness in precious minerals. Canadian Shield. The northeastern part of Alberta, northern parts of Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec, as well as most of Labrador, are located on a vast rock base known as the Canadian Shield. The shield mostly consists of eroded hilly terrain and contains many lakes and important rivers used for hydroelectric production, particularly in northern Quebec and Ontario. The shield also encloses an area of wetlands, the Hudson Bay Lowlands. Some particular regions of the shield are referred to as mountain ranges, including the Torngat and Laurentian Mountains. The shield cannot support intensive agriculture, although there is subsistence agriculture and small dairy farms in many of the river valleys and around the abundant lakes, particularly in the southern regions. Boreal forest covers much of the shield, with a mix of conifers that provide valuable timber resources in areas such as the Central Canadian Shield Forests ecoregion that covers much of northern Ontario. The region is known for its extensive mineral reserves. The Canadian Shield is known for its vast minerals, such as emeralds, diamonds and copper. The Canadian Shield is also called the Mineral House. Canadian Interior Plains. The Canadian Prairies are part of a vast sedimentary plain covering much of Alberta, southern Saskatchewan, and southwestern Manitoba, as well as much of the region between the Rocky Mountains and the Great Slave and Great Bear Lakes in Northwest Territories. The plains generally describes the expanses of arable agricultural land which sustain extensive grain farming operations in the southern part of the provinces. Despite this, some areas such as the Cypress Hills and the Alberta Badlands are quite hilly, and the prairie provinces contain large areas of forests such as the mid-continental Canadian forests. The size is roughly 1,900,000 square kilometers. Western Cordillera. The Canadian Cordillera, contiguous with the American Cordillera, is bounded by the Rocky Mountains to the east and the Pacific Ocean to the west. The Canadian Rockies are part of a major continental divide that extends north and south through western North America and western South America. The Columbia and the Fraser Rivers have their headwaters in the Canadian Rockies and are the second and third largest rivers respectively to drain to the west coast of North America. To the west of their headwaters, across the Rocky Mountain Trench, is a second belt of mountains, the Columbia Mountains, comprising the Selkirk, Purcell, Monashee and Caribou Mountains subranges. Immediately west of the Columbia Mountains is a large and rugged interior plateau, encompassing the Chilcotin and Caribou regions in central British Columbia, the Nechako Plateau further north, and also the Thompson Plateau in the south. The Peace River Valley in northeastern British Columbia is Canada's most northerly agricultural region, although it is part of the prairies. The dry, temperate climate of the Okanagan Valley in south-central British Columbia provides ideal conditions for fruit growing and the flourishing wine industry. The semi-arid belt of the southern interior also includes the Fraser Canyon and Thompson, Nicola, Similkameen, Shuswap and Boundary regions, and fruit growing is common in these areas also, and also in the West Kootenay. Between the plateau and the coast is the province's largest mountain range, the Coast Mountains. The Coast Mountains contain some of the largest temperate latitude ice fields in the world. On the south coast of British Columbia, Vancouver Island is separated from the mainland by the continuous Juan de Fuca, Georgia, and Johnston Straits. Those straits include a large number of islands, notably the Gulf Islands and Discovery Islands. North, near the Alaskan border, Hydrography lies across Hecate Strait from the North Coast region and to its north, across Dixon Entrance from southeast Alaska. Other than in the plateau regions of the interior and its many river valleys, most of British Columbia is coniferous forest. The only temperate rainforests in Canada are found along the Pacific coast in the Coast Mountains, on Vancouver Island, and on Hydrography, and in the Caribou Mountains on the eastern flank of the plateau. The western Cordillera continues northwards past the Liard River in northernmost British Columbia to include the Mackenzie and Selwyn Ranges, which lie in the far western Northwest Territories, and the eastern Yukon Territory. West of them is the large Yukon Plateau and, west of that, the Yukon Ranges and St. Elias Mountains, which include Canada's and British Columbia's highest summits. Mount St. Elias in the Cloane region and Mount Fairweather in the Tatshenshini-Olsk region. The headwaters of the Yukon River, the largest and longest of the rivers on the Pacific slope, lie in northern British Columbia at Hatlin and Teslin Lakes. Volcanoes. Western Canada has many volcanoes and is part of the Pacific Ring of Fire, a system of volcanoes found around the margins of the Pacific Ocean. There are over 200 young volcanic centers that stretch northward from the Cascade Range to Yukon. They are grouped into 5 volcanic belts with different volcano types and tectonic settings. The northern Cordilleran volcanic province was formed by faulting, cracking, rifting, and the interaction between the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate. The Garibaldi volcanic belt was formed by subduction of the Juan de Fuca Plate beneath the North American Plate. The Anaheim volcanic belt was formed as a result of the North American Plate sliding westward over the Anaheim hotspot. The Chilcotin group is believed to have formed as a result of back arc extension behind the Cascadia subduction zone. The Wrangell volcanic field formed as a result of subduction of the Pacific Plate beneath the North American Plate at the easternmost end of the Aleutian Trench. Volcanism has also occurred in the Canadian Shield. It contains over 150 volcanic belts that range from 600 million to 2.8 billion years old. Many of Canada's major ore deposits are associated with Precambrian volcanoes. There are pillow lavas in the Northwest Territories that are about 2.6 billion years old and are preserved in the Cameron River volcanic belt. The pillow lavas in rocks over 2 billion years old in the Canadian Shield signify that great oceanic volcanoes existed during the early stages of the formation of the Earth's crust. Ancient volcanoes play an important role in estimating Canada's mineral potential. Many of the volcanic belts bear ore deposits that are related to the volcanism. Canadian Arctic. While the largest part of the Canadian Arctic is composed of seemingly endless permafrost and tundra north of the tree line, it encompasses geological regions of varying types. The Arctic Cordillera contains the northernmost mountain system in the world. The Arctic Lowlands and Hudson Bay Lowlands comprise a substantial part of the geographic region often designated as the Canadian Shield. The ground in the Arctic is mostly composed of permafrost, making construction difficult and often hazardous, and agriculture virtually impossible. The Arctic, when defined as everything north of the tree line, covers most of Nunavut and the northernmost parts of Northwest Territories, Yukon, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, and Labrador. Hydrography. Canada holds vast reserves of water. Its rivers discharge nearly 9% of the world's renewable water supply. It contains a quarter of the world's wetlands, and it has the third largest amount of glaciers. Because of extensive glaciation, Canada hosts more than 2 million lakes. Of those that are entirely within Canada, more than 31,000 are between 3 and in area, while 563 are larger than 100 square kilometers. Rivers. Canada's 2 longest rivers are the Mackenzie, which empties into the Arctic Ocean and drains a large part of northwestern Canada, and the St. Lawrence, which drains the Great Lakes and empties into the Gulf of St. Lawrence. The Mackenzie is over 4,200 kilometers in length while the St. Lawrence is over 3,000 kilometers in length. Rounding out the 10 longest rivers within Canada are the Nelson, Churchill, Peace, Fraser, North Saskatchewan, Ottawa, Athabasca and Yukon rivers. Drainage basins. The Atlantic watershed drains the entirety of the Atlantic provinces, most of inhabited Quebec and large parts of southern Ontario. It is mostly drained by the economically important St. Lawrence River and its tributaries, notably the Saguenay, Manicouagan and Ottawa rivers. The Great Lakes and Lake Nipigon are also drained by the St. Lawrence. The Churchill River and St. John River are other important elements of the Atlantic watershed in Canada. The Hudson Bay watershed drains over a third of Canada. It covers Manitoba, northern Ontario and Quebec, most of Saskatchewan, southern Alberta, southwestern Nunavut and the southern half of Baffin Island. This basin is most important in fighting drought in the prairies and producing hydroelectricity, especially in Manitoba, northern Ontario, and Quebec. Major elements of this watershed include Lake Winnipeg, Nelson River, the North Saskatchewan and South Saskatchewan rivers, Assiniboine River, and Netilling Lake on Baffin Island. Wollaston Lake lies on the boundary between the Hudson Bay and Arctic Ocean watersheds and drains into both. It is the largest lake in the world that naturally drains in two directions. The continental divide in the Rockies separates the Pacific watershed in British Columbia and Yukon from the Arctic and Hudson Bay watersheds. This watershed irrigates the agriculturally important areas of inner British Columbia and is used to produce hydroelectricity. Major elements are the Yukon, Columbia and Fraser rivers, the northern parts of Alberta, Manitoba and British Columbia, most of Northwest Territories and Nunavut, and parts of Yukon are drained by the Arctic watershed. This watershed has been little used for hydroelectricity, with the exception of the Mackenzie River, the longest river in Canada. The Peace, Athabasca, and Liard rivers, as well as Great Bear Lake and Great Slave Lake are significant elements of the Arctic watershed. Each of these elements eventually merges with the Mackenzie, thereby draining the vast majority of the Arctic watershed. The southernmost part of Alberta drains into the Gulf of Mexico through the Milk River and its tributaries. The Milk River originates in the Rocky Mountains of Montana, then flows into Alberta, then returns into the United States, where it is drained by the Missouri River. A small area of southwestern Saskatchewan is drained by Battle Creek, which empties into the Milk River. Political geography. Canada is divided into 10 provinces and 3 territories. According to Statistics Canada, 72.0% of the population is concentrated within 150 kilometers of the nation's southern border with the United States. 70.0% live south of the 49th parallel, and over 60% of the population lives along the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River between Windsor, Ontario, and Quebec City. This leaves the vast majority of Canada's territory as sparsely populated wilderness. Canada's population density is 3.5 people/km2, among the lowest in the world. Despite this, 79.7% of Canada's population resides in urban areas, where population densities are increasing. Canada shares with the U.S. the world's longest undefended border at 8,893 kilometers, 2,477 kilometers, or with Alaska. The Danish island dependency of Greenland lies to Canada's northeast, separated from the Canadian Arctic islands by Baffin Bay and Davis Strait. The French islands of Saint-Pierre and Miquelon lie off the southern coast of Newfoundland in the Gulf of St. Lawrence and have a maritime territorial enclave within Canada's exclusive economic zone. Canada also shares a land border with Denmark, as maps released in December 2006 show that the agreed-upon boundaries run through the middle of Hans Island. Canada's geographic proximity to the United States has historically bound the two countries together in the political world as well. Canada's position between the Soviet Union and the U.S. was strategically important during the Cold War, since the route over the North Pole and Canada was the fastest route by air between the two countries and the most direct route for intercontinental ballistic missiles. Since the end of the Cold War, there has been growing speculation that Canada's Arctic maritime claims may become increasingly important if global warming melts the ice enough to open the Northwest Passage. Similarly, the disputed and tiny Hans Island, in the Nares Strait between Ellesmere Island and northern Greenland, may be a flashpoint for challenges to overall claims of Canadian sovereignty in the Arctic. Brought to you by WikiVidi documentaries. Would you like to know more?